The School Times is proud to present Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya in its show Ed Talks with Amitabh. Professor Upadhyaya currently holds the Unesco Chair for Peace and Intercultural Understanding and serves on the Unesco Uni-Twin Executive Committee of Interreligious Dialogue and Intercultural Understanding. Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya also holds the prestigious Global Fellowship of the Peace Research Institute, Oslo. He has committed his life and times to the cause of peace and peace education. He has also authored a book, A Long Walk of Peace.
नमस्कार दोस्तों, मैं अमिताभ and you are watching Ed Talks with Amitabh. And friends, as promised, every Monday 4 p.m. we bring you a social influencer, someone who has created an impact on society or on education. And we have Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya connecting with us straight from Varanasi. And you have just seen a short video clip. I don't need to say anything more. Dr. Priyankar Upadhyaya has committed his life and times to the cause of education, and particularly in a specific area of peace research and education. And there's a lot of work he's done in the context of interreligious peace and education and conflict management, and has been the chair for UNESCO, also currently heading certain committees there. So without any further delay, friends, allow me to invite Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya so that we can learn directly from the legend himself. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya. Welcome to
Namaste.
our show.
Namaste, Amitabh, and to all the audience and all the viewers around. It's a pleasure to join this program, which I think has already taken roots and proliferating. And especially because this is an area from our heart, peace education. And so I would be very happy to share some of my experience, although I don't see myself as a social influencer, but in a limited sense, I think I have tried something with friends and colleagues and my students especially, and probably the reason I'm here.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. And as you said that you don't see yourself as a social influencer, I think that is the beauty of people like you. And I remember I was attending one seminar with one of the Nobel laureates in one of the colleges in Calcutta, in the Heritage Engineering College here in Calcutta. And the gentleman, one of the young student asked the Nobel laureate that, I want to be a Nobel laureate. Can you tell me how can I become a Nobel laureate? And his answer was very, very simple. He said, my friend, you don't plan to be a Nobel laureate, and I also never planned to be a Nobel laureate. I just kept on focusing and remained dedicated to my work, and it just happened. And I think when you said that I don't see myself as a social influencer, so after creating so much of a social impact, that is your humility, and to say that you don't see yourself that, but then your journey, your life and time is really great.
Well, thank you so much, Amitabh, for your very kind words. I think this kind of empathy and mutual appreciation is very important in today's world, and especially if we are looking at peace as some kind of transformative influence in people's life. But just to tell you, just to make this whole environment a little light, when you mentioned about Nobel Peace, Nobel Prize, so many things came to my mind. I mean, there's some wonderful people across the continents who have attained this distinction. At the same time, sometimes it's political also. So, one is not surprised that sometimes the warmongers and people, they aspire to become a Nobel laureate. And this also takes me back. I will not take names here. But incidentally, I work in an institution in Norway, Peace Research Institute, Oslo, which is, very reputed, hardly needs any words from me. but they are also one of the units that decide about. They actually examine their members sometimes examine the nomination. So I've seen this process. And let me end up by saying that I admire Jean-Paul Sartre, who was offered this Nobel Prize, and he refused to have it. So, this is the world of paradox that we live, notwithstanding the fact that Nobel Prize and Nobel Peace Prize in particular is something that everybody should aspire.
Absolutely. Thank you for these profound words, and sir. And sir, we in our show we would like people to benefit from your life and times, your journey, and of course, we would like to talk about that is the title and the theme of your book as well. That a walk. For peace, and we would like to talk about peace. But before that, I would like my audience to know a bit about your journey from how you have taken your life from your early days to becoming a professor at BHU.
It's never easy, I think, to look back, because even if we wish not to be not to be subjective, but we are always selective about good things that we want to forget. We expune them from our consciousness. But Amitabh, let me tell you very quickly that I was raised in a small town of Madhya Pradesh, not so small anymore. It's a division now. It's Sagar. And my father was a Sanskrit professor there in Sagar University, which then was the only institution of its kind there. And it was a pleasant surrounding. But incidentally, my initial schooling was done in a military school. And I'm just there's a point that I want to build up. And this is very spontaneous. This school was known as Maha Regimental Center. And there was a Brigadier Khasiram, which had established the school. And selectively, it will take students from the civilian pockets also, and university campus being one. So I was initially trained, and I would do this rope climbing and all kind of gymnasium. And military was a part of my psyche as I began. And later on, of course, I shifted to other schools. And eventually, I came to Delhi at JNU, where I did courses on both on armament as well as disarmament. But eventually, to short circuit this question, I ended up, one of the most prestigious assignments I did was when I was invited at the US Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs as a visiting professor. And initially I was very shocked, because first it was a very prestigious offer, and I don't think any other Indian professor had the occasion of being there. And anyway, when I was thinking whether, because I was developing my interest in peace research, peace education, I remember that one of very senior colleague whom I was mentioning my dilemma, and he said, look, if you want to understand peace, you need to know about armament, about war, about the military also. Because what the problem is that the peaceniks only meet with peaceniks, and the military walas and the this army setup people, they only interact with their own setup. So actually, when I reached there, and I spent 2 stints there, long stints, and they are always ever eager to bring me back, and they brought me back also. It's beautiful. Colorado Springs, as you know, the mountainous part of the United States, is very pleasant. So when I reached there, I remember that I asked them that, why did you pick me up? You have a lot of people who work continuously in strategic studies and defense studies and military studies. He said, we wanted to see what a peace researcher looks like, because even for us, the people who engage in war, it's we need to understand as much as you need to understand us. And very soon after, and Amitabh, let me just close it, then we'll go to other areas. And that just in a few days, it struck me, this building. Incidentally, those of us, and maybe your preceding generation, we used to read about NORAD, this big mountain which was created in Colorado, where the Americans had dug the whole mountain, and they used to monitor the entire world horizon, the air, space, etc., through there, and that's 60s I'm talking about. NORAD is not. So all the novels would have. So NORAD was a part of this particular academy, and I had the fortune of going there and seeing how much resources go there. But back to the point, peace and conflict relationship, and I think that's a very important thing that I would like to convey before we go on to other field. As I traveled around that building, and this building alone was a single building, the largest building of that point. It was, I think, if I remember right, it was built in 1954. But for many decades, it remained the single largest building of the United States. You can imagine. And I used to move around. There were galleries and corridors. And on every corridor, I will find a dress, a uniform of a soldier in a photograph. Initially, for some days, I didn't look. One day, I really went and started looking. These were young pilots, because it's Air Force Academy, young pilots who had lost their lives in Vietnam. And as perhaps we don't realize or don't want to recall, that in the Vietnam War itself, over nearly 70,000 US soldiers had lost their lives, and their names are inscribed in Washington, D.C. or New York. And then it's all the young people, 21, 22, 24. And then it came to me that, look, if peace is precious for anybody more than any other strata of society, it is for the soldiers. And that's the connection between war and peace. It's so important for us to understand that they are not mutually exclusive. They are every soldier. Nobody, like with all the great talks about chivalry and we all admire these wonderful soldiers who guard our borders, and I'll come to that. So with huge admiration for them, even for them and their families, it's very important to aspire for peace, because peace alone guarantees them a life. Otherwise, so these are random thoughts. So my life journey from a small town, I remember, I was very just about opening my consciousness, hardly 3-4 years or something. 62 war came. And I used to clenched a fist, Chinese, and how do we deal with them? And you'll be surprised, and perhaps I never mentioned it in a public gathering, that for many years I remained crazy about collecting the kind of fighter planes, the Navy frigate, and my knowledge was better than many professors of the subject. I used to collect paper clippings. So when Jaguar came, when Su-7 came, and I was not even in my high school, and instead of focusing on my course and studies, mind you, I used to work very hard on collecting these things. From there, to become a peace researcher, I think the clue is, that's what I was probably mentioning to you in passing, was the realization that most of us don't tend to see peace as something pragmatic, something which is as important as life itself. Peace is not about utopia. Peace is our most practical need, our utility, whether it is your, home, or it is your community, or the international world. Because if you are not peaceful, you incur a huge cost. And every time we see it, I can go on endlessly on this.
And it's so intriguing to listen to it, and the trigger that inspired you to move in your journey towards peace research, and I'm sure a lot of our audience and viewers must be finding it very, very intriguing. And one thing which I realized it, and I always believe the same as well, we all have a point of trigger in our life that defines the direction in which we are going to move, and this particular walk across that building, which kind of influenced you towards this war and peace, and your thought process started moving in that direction. And and I think you've done amazing work in the area of peace research, and to an extent that even in BHU there is a department, there is a course, there's a master's degree now being run under your, the department being set under your chairmanship for where there's a MA in peace and peace research, peace and conflict. So I think bringing a peace to now that brings a question to you, sir, and I would like to use this opportunity to understand and develop insight in the concept of peace. Is peace a subject of study? Is peace an attitude? Is peace something that only required when there are war times?
You know, I know it's a usual thing because, there are certain terms, Amitabh, in our lives
Ji,
which are empowering terms,
ji,
such as security. Security, the minute you say security, everybody, oh, it's about existentialist security. You want to live. And I think for that, you want to be secure and so on and so forth. So there are many terms in different languages which are empowering terms in the sense that which are generally captured by important communities and important, what should I say, powers to define in their own ways. Now, I'll give you an example. The story begins. Anybody who knows anything, one of the first primer about peace is that peace, very unanimously, I would say at the outset, as the absence of war. The general notion, if you ask a layman, what is peace? He said, it's the absence of war.
right,
And now, have you noticed that war is never defined as the absence of peace? I mean, look at the binary. Peace is the absence of war. But war is not the absence of peace. Why? Because generally in our mindset, we have been given to understand, we have been, a construction has been made by the society and power that be, whether you go to the patriarchal society or the military generals ruling the world, where we see war and conflict as a constant situation, a Hobbesian state of affairs or a Machiavellian state of affairs that everybody is after everybody's life. So war is a constant and peace is an exception. So that is where this whole thing is there. Peace as an absence of war. War is there always. But peace is an exception. So this is all jugglery of words. And that's where I think those of my friends, and I don't encourage them to read this man, Michel Foucault, Foucauldian logic, because I find it very tough to understand even one sentence what he writes. But in short, he gave a very strong meaning to the connection between power and knowledge. He said that the way we think, Amitabh, the way education is framed, and I would like to, have a conversation on education. What kind of education? This is entirely controlled by the powerful institutions, powerful communities, and in our case, the market. And as you know, that probably since past 100 years or more, I mean, the militarism and the military industry has driven war situation all along. You don't have to read Noam Chomsky or anybody like that. But look at the America's growth in First World War, Second World War, or look at all the countries which sell arms. And amazingly, and the tragedy and irony, which is very difficult for us, we celebrate when we have the arrival of MiGs or Rafale or Mirage and so on and so forth, as if it's going to defend your life or something. But in reality, who are the beneficiaries? Who are the people who are benefiting out of it? I mean, the French Dassault is benefiting, or the General Electric of the United States is benefiting, or the Russians are benefiting. So, this has been going on. It's not about a particular government. So you raise that specter, you qualify war as normal, then therefore you qualify defense expenditure as, something that cannot be do away with. And as a result, you see education and health always takes a backseat, not here in India, but particularly in India, as compared to defense expenditures and military expenditure. So back to the thing about defining peace. The difficulty is that peace, we don't, in Indian languages and in most of the our languages, in Hindi and Sanskrit, if you think there are other languages as well. So peace is, Shanti is not the absence of war. In our tradition, Shanti was more about the inner peace. Shanti was not defined in that sense. But the paradigm, the Western knowledge system, it came to us and we started thinking peace only as the absence of war. So what was peace for us? In our tradition, in Indian traditions, for instance, peace was about planetary peace. Peace for about, if you look at the famous Sanskrit or prayers, the Shanti prayer, we seek Shanti in our environment. We seek Shanti in our lives. we seek shanti in antariksh. So for us, it was harmony with yourself, harmony with others, harmony with nature. But that particular understanding was, it never upsurged. Even now, when people and the leaders, etc., talk about it, was Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, for example. But then the overarching influence was that of an understanding which came from the war-seeking and war-based economies, and that unfortunately are teaching us how to be peaceful today. And that is where the tragedy of United Nations comes into being.
Absolutely, and in fact, that brings an intrigue in my mind. The West, with the Western philosophy that peace is absence of war. If you go into just that premise, right now the whole world is at peace. But then there's a lot of conflict that people are going through because of the pandemic and the economic crisis, which is also affecting. So even when there is a absence of war, the internal peace is affected because of the other circumstances.
I don't know, Amitabh. Perhaps here I really wish you are true and you were true, but actually that's not the case. I mean, you see, if you look around, if we look around, see when this COVID pandemic erupted, and suddenly there was a realization world over, especially in the United Nations and elsewhere, saying that it's the gravest tragedy the humankinds have encountered. And at that time, what has happened is that even the UN Secretary General made an appeal that, see, this is the time when the countries should stop quarreling, countries should stop conflicting with themselves. He made appeal time and again and time and again. And look what has happened. I mean, I think we are perhaps in a more conflicting position than any time earlier, in the sense that whether you see the Indian subcontinent, China, India stress, the constant Pakistan's challenges to us. And, so what I'm thinking is that maybe this is something that we need to really look at more seriously, and probably do something about it in terms of what as a people can do.
Absolutely. And sir, before we take our journey further on a lighter tone, we talked about war and peace. I am aware that you and in our Indian concept, we always refer to a better half to our partner, our married partner, the better half. So I think we have chosen that word very judiciously, talking about you're calling the other person better half, so that there is a peace always prevailing, because we are letting the other person know you are the better one. And now my lighter vein question to you is peace in the context of family. And you and ma'am both are professors, and both of you have extreme achievements in your own respective fields. But then there is always there is an identity, there is an ideology, and there is a two intellectual minds at the same house. How conflicting that gets, and how do you ensure peace at home?
See, you know very well, Amitabh, that somebody is listening, so I can't share. But, see, I will tell you one thing. One of the very basic lessons of conflict and conflict research is the realization that if we do not have a little music of conflict around us, the relationship is incomplete. Relationship has no substance. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi used to be very fond of saying that I want conflict, because the minute you have a conflict situation, you try to find out about the other person. It is the spirit of anonymity, and which is what has bugged the present society, the modernity, for example, in the sense that we don't want to know about others. And probably the same applies to the spouse. So conflict brings that sweetness in relationship, provided you know how to manage it before it assumes dangerous proportions or before it becomes really dysfunctional. And I
Absolutely.
can tell you one thing, without, I'm being very honest, that perchance I started getting to know this discipline, subdiscipline of conflict resolution, conflict research, conflict management, etc., etc. And it brings a lot of insights to you. It's something like listening to a great Maharshi, great philosopher, whether it is, and the same messages. What it tells you, it doesn't tell you so much about the Maya and everything is mithya, but it
Right.
tells you that conflict is about incompatibilities. And it's not violence, it's incompatibilities. And these incompatibilities can be managed. So many things are there. You can sort of change your vantage point, and the same thing
Right.
that you don't like would start looking far more acceptable to you. So the conflict resolution, conflict management, the techniques, etc., the skills, they have a natural dividend as far as your own relationships are concerned. And of
Right.
course, in relationships, your own family life is important. It doesn't take me a second to apologize to even my students. When my boys were younger, occasionally I will go and say, forgive me, I'm at wrong. This is not typically a religious thing. Of course, religions bring good things, this forgiveness. But this
Right.
forgiveness is also a part of the conflict resolution techniques that we learn. What is so problematic in dealing with your own ego and saying, I'm sorry, we all make mistakes. I have made this mistake and I apologize, and the problem is solved. So that's where I think that all these, this kind of education is very necessary at all levels, formal and informal.
Absolutely, sir. And thank you so much for being so candid and so forthcoming in sharing. And audience and viewers, I'm sure you'll agree, listening to Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya, that when we talk about peace, when we talk about conflict, we are talking about at an individual level within our own self. We're talking about it in, it exists in every paradigm, in every aspect of life. It exists at an individual level, it exists at a family level, it exists at a community level, it exists at a national and at an international level. It's just that we have to know how to go for conflict resolution, conflict management, and all these aspects at different level. Need and approaches may be very, very different. And what I could make out, sir, would correct me if I go wrong in my interpretation. What I learned in the last bit that he said, one of the best ways of managing conflict is first to accept that there is a conflict. And once you accept and you start working towards finding a solution, you end up evolving and growing. And because the denial of existence of conflict will lead to greater problems and greater conflicts, and will not be able to manage it so very effectively. Sir, this brings me to take your permission before we take our discussion further, and encourage our audience and viewers right now to feel free to put up their queries and inquiries if they want to ask. Will that be okay with you, sir?
Oh, absolutely. That's dialogue is a part of this whole process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Friends, you are watching, you are listening to Professor Priyankar Upadhyay. You will not get a better authority to discuss issues on and the concept of peace and conflict. So make best use of this opportunity and ask your questions. Put your queries in the inquiries in the chat box. We will take as many we can. And you are listening to him connecting with us directly from his native city at the moment where he resides. That is Varanasi uh, in Uttar Pradesh. And you are watching Ed Talks with Amitabh. I'm your friendly psychologist, Amitabh Mohan. Sir, taking the journey further, and you know, you have authored this book, which is, allow me to take this visual I have of your, we have this book that you have authored on piece, which is a long walk of peace that you've authored. And I think this, whatever the concept and the phenomena that you have written there, I personally look at it that when we talk about long walk of peace, I would like to draw a parallel with a old dictum that a child is a father of man, and the journey towards peace has begun in the when we are born, and the way our environment is educating us, the kind of education that we are being provided. And right now in the education sector, new education policy is very much a talk of the nation, and they are trying to bring and incorporate a lot of new elements of nationalism and other aspects. I would like your take on peace as a journey in an individual's life. What can educators do? How can peace be an integrated part, or peace education be an integrated part of education and the schooling?
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. Either this answering this question also entails a very prolix journey. I mean, very long, and one has to be very selective. But let me say that, and I'll go by what my present position entails me to say it very quickly, that I think all of us are aware of the preamble of the UNESCO. UNESCO, that is the lead agency for education, social and cultural reframing, and headquartered in Paris, and part of perhaps most significant, most active part of United Nations entities. Now, UNESCO's preamble says something, and this was 1945, soon after the Second World War. And it says that since the wars begin in the minds of humans, it is in the mind of humans that the defenses of peace should be built. Actually, at that time, war and peace was seen only as a man's business, by the way. So originally, preamble words were, since the wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that, see, women were not there, but we'll come to that if need be. So, that is the clue. Somewhere is the consciousness that, like the construction of war, peace, territoriality, even nationalism, internationalism, enemy, friend, this is all a kind of construction that draws from our early learnings and our education. And there, I think the kind of education that we impart can make a critical difference. The challenge, Amitabh, at the end of the day is, whenever we finish a discussion, we worry how many are actually our beneficiaries, how many people are in the system to get benefit from it. And there, the data is horrendous, because I think there are a lot of challenges, not only in terms of how many school-going children are given quality education, which is important for us, but also probably in terms of what is their curricula, what kind of learnings they have, what do they want to really achieve in the society. So a lot of these attributes, these questions they come up, and this actually becomes very vital when we look at the impact of this COVID pandemic, because even before this pandemic, by the United Nations agencies' calculations, whether it is UNICEF, UNESCO, it was very, very sort of a bleak situation in terms of the school enrollment, and the predictions are that say in 2030, when these United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda is supposed to fructify, majority of the school-going children would not have even that facility especially in the developing part of the world. So the point which I want to build up is, the first question is to get them proper education, quality education. I think in India, especially, we manage with only the numbers, that how many schools are there, how many, even there, I think we are really, really in a deficient state. But more than that, it is the quality that is questionable. And there's so many things that come in on, not only curricula, then the allied questions of poverty, the consciousness, and a lot of things. But let me at the outset also tell you that it has been no less than an achievement that the United Nations decided to create a standalone goal of education, I think many of us would know about the Sustainable Development Goals. And if not, I think that is one thing that gives you a complete hold over to understand our today's contemporary reality. So the SDG 4, this was for the first time that the United Nations gave an importance to education. Education was taken as a standalone goal, and a goal without which rest of the goals, whether poverty, whether the cities, whether living condition, health, etc., will not grow. So this was a realization about the important, sort of. Importance of education as a transformative trajectory. And then also there is this question of peace education. Now, in the name of peace education, what we tend to do is to, just think about Gandhi. I mean, Gandhi, of course, is a one-stop. You can get everything, but that's fine. But peace education also entails environment. You see, the point which we did, and that's a second part of your question, that when I think way back in 2015, the United Nations gave UNESCO a responsibility to develop a holistic frame of peace, defining peace. And then UNESCO started with a team. And I was just a member of that team, let me confess. But very soon, I not only became the leader of that team, and that's what the Indian mind can do. I could think in a more complicated manner than my counterparts from Latin America, US, and other things. I became the leader. And this book was published. Now it's translated in all UN languages, and millions of copies have been freely distributed, and it's also available on the net. So this title of the book, which was, we got this title of the book after a lot of intellectual jostling. I was struggling with a lot of Nobel Peace laureates saying, "Oh, this is long was to peace. Why off peace?" And as I mentioned, passing, that I said, look, peace is not a destination. It's not like a train station like Howrah or Mumbai where the train will stop, not go anywhere. No, peace is the way. There is nothing like a final junction or a station. And this is precisely how Gandhi is conceptualized when he says that there is no end like peace. Peace is the way. So looking at peace as some kind of a style, a way, an approach to live your everyday life, I think that is what this book. So in this book, we try to, argue. We try to argue that peace is a concern of all United Nations agencies. So for us, peace is health. For us, peace is education. For us, peace is culture, whether the Pushma of culture, etc. For us, peace includes everything. And this is not idealistic. So this particular book actually surveys the work of all the United Nations entities, ranging from even the market, oriented organization like World Bank, WHO, UNICEF, UNDP. See, if you look at the framework today, and especially a lot of teachers and fellow colleagues are there, one very easy way of doing things is to realize that peace goes hand in hand with human rights. On the one hand, that's United Nations, human rights and development. What kind of development? It's a sustainable development. Development not only in terms of GNP and profit making, but development which is development, human rights, along with peace. And that's what the current definition of sustaining peace has. It's not sustainable peace. I mean, anybody who just Googles it, sustaining peace, will get a lot of answers about it.
Right.
So the point I'm trying to build up is that in this work, we did for 3 years, and it was published 2018 end. And now even a Hindi version is being commissioned, but it's translated into many languages, including French, Arabic, etc. So, and by the way, we have started another project. Perhaps that will be steered, that will be cooked not in Paris, but in my city, Varanasi. That was the condition. It's a UN project in which we are going to look at the interreligious dialogue. We are going to argue that look, we have given up on interreligious understanding. We have given up on the multiculturalism. We have given up on the great tradition of our own tradition, Kabir, Buddha, and so many people. In Banaras, for example, my city, it is not simply, it's the most holiest place for Hindu, but it is also the gathering place for all religions. Mind you, 1500 plus mosques. Mind you, best of churches. Then Sarnath with Buddha. Then this Kabir Das and so on and so forth. So the point I'm trying to say is that this kind of inter-religious and intercultural understanding has to be brought out. And what we are going to do, that we are not simply going to focus on interfaith experiences. And this is a worldwide study. So whether it is Africa, whether it is South America, whether it is Far East, we will bring these experiences from everyday life to create a narrative that even today is notwithstanding that many of us have lost hopes that, well, the fundamentalism is going, terrorism is going. We are going to say that, look, it's quite possible to become a Sufi, if I can say so, to love other religions, to bring all religions together. So this long walk of peace was a success, and inspired by that, I think on 6th of next month, I'll be addressing the Interagency Task Force, which is the strongest body of the United Nations. And earlier too, on last year in September, and my God, this has really happened finally, that this year has gone into a surplus year. We just forget which year you're talking about. But I think a few months back, I was invited by the President of the UN General Assembly to celebrate the 20 years of culture of peace, which incidentally is a very important concept. So in this particular dialogue, I made this presentation about interreligious understanding, and my argument was that without being euphoric, without being unrealistic, without being idealistic, I think we can develop a platform, we can develop some kind of self-assurance and confidence that people at the grassroots level, people at the community level, they want peace, they want interreligious peace. They are helping each other. There are stories. Not much is lost. That's a world over, at the scenario.
Absolutely.
And we have to work in that direction. So, I mean, it gives us a lot of hope and thing. I only want that people should read a bit of, I'm not promoting UNESCO, but see, there are a lot of beautiful reports that have come out, which gives better sense to how the educator should look at the education. There is a Delores report, Rethinking Education Towards a Global Common Good, which the UNESCO has brought out. And it really tells you that education, it talks about certain terms that we need to really think about. And one term is cultural literacy. Now, what is this cultural literacy? Cultural literacy is not simply that you need to know about other cultures. Religious literacy. I remember recently we celebrated one of the, I don't know which, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, a very famous Amitabh, before I think you were born, we had this poet, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, whom we used to call as Rashtra Kavi. And he wrote a Hindi book volume, Sanskriti Ke Char Adhyay. And one of the lines really, I mean, you were talking about the transformative moment in my life. And one of the opening lines of a chapter was, in which he says in Hindi, beautiful Hindi, कि समस्या ये नहीं है कि हम दूसरों के धर्म को जानते हैं कि नहीं जानते. समस्या ये है कि हम अपने ही धर्म को नहीं जानते. अब आप एक, if you take this way across, Amitabh, you will see that people know a lot about other religions, their faults, their follies, their duties, and if you ask them about their own religion, आप देखिए आजकल वो पटनायक का आता है ना, जो this beautiful man who writes about myths, etc. What is that?
Right.
एक serial आता है जो
I'm not getting the first name right now, but the very popular series.
हाँ, पटनायक है ना. तो वो अपने सीरियल की शुरुआत में ही आस्क एवरीबॉडी, अरे भाई ब्रह्मा कौन थे? ब्रह्मा की पत्नी मुझे नहीं पता. फिर वो रामायण के बारे में पूछेगा, सिवाय इसके कि राम सीता उनको पता है, कृष्ण वो पता है, मगर so it's important to know religion. See, one reason why this particular project and my effort is in UNESCO chair with colleagues, and I'm just a small part of that, is the realization that religion and faith cannot be wished away. This was one of those myopia. It was a secular myopia, an understanding that we can do away with religion and faith. And that was a cardinal mistake. It is important not only to understand religion and faith as a part of our education and pedagogies, but also to realize that both religion and faith have tremendous conflict resolution, potentials. All religions have the potentials, and it is done. If you look at my city in rituals, अब मुहर्रम होगा तो उसमें शिया के साथ सुन्नी भी हैं, सुन्नी के साथ शिया भी, हिंदू भी घोड़ा बना रहे हैं. So we have to, this, you see, when you say what do, you have to transform the narrative, and that is where I think so many other things have happened. I can keep on talking.
That's so very important point. I could just recall that was Devdutt Patnaik we were talking about.
Yes, it's fascinating. I watched it.
Right, and so profound, sir. What you said कि समस्या ये नहीं है कि हम दूसरे धर्मों को नहीं जानते, समस्या ये है कि हम अपने ही धर्म को नहीं जानते हैं, समझते हैं. And I think I always believe that what I know about my religion is what I've been told about it. I've actually hardly have gone into doing a direct understanding of the same. तो जो लोगों ने interpretations हमें बता दिए, कहीं ना कहीं हम उसी को धर्म मान के आगे बढ़ गए, and that is one of the reasons for the kind of conflict that we all are facing, the religious conflict. And you also very rightly pointed out, sir, this secular myopia. I just love that expression, the secular myopia. I think we got confused that secularism is not about leaving the faith away. It is about accepting every faith, and the goodness of every faith is secularism. But in somewhere people started interpreting secularism as doing away with the belief in religion, and it is something which is against religion. And I think that's where the interpretation has given us a problem. So we are having a lot of queries now from our viewers, and they want to make the best use of your presence here. And we have a query from, there are a lot of appreciation and acknowledgement. We even, I think we've got one of your pupil saying that Guruji has been inspiring, and you live what you say. It's not that this work, and that's Dr. Anita Day. And we have now a question from Suparna Chakravarti. Suparna Chakravarti writes, I have two queries. One, how to inculcate peace studies in school. Two, in this computer age, children are so busy gaming on computers, and most of these games are full of aggression. So how do you inculcate mindset of peace at a school level during the growing up years?
That's very, very, very questions, I must confess, I admit. Now, one challenge is peace studies in schools. Now, there are two, alternate approaches that have been thought through time and again. It doesn't work. So my own understanding has been that you introduce these elements of peacefulness in philosophy, in even if you teach science. I mean, unfortunately, our understanding of science is very superficial. If you see the best of scientists, and you will have a good discussion on violence, etc., the futility of violence, etc. In literature, in general, even when you study environment, so these elements of peacefulness, conflict resolution can be taught very easily. And the second part is, I think, very, very unfortunate that somehow in our curricula, we focus more on job-oriented education and so on and so forth. I think there is some shift in the new education policy regarding this. So it's so important for us to make our children global citizens. If COVID-19 has taught us one thing, and that is, if we don't reframe, restructure, rethink about the way we live, and just remain focused in market ambiance, then nothing will remain. So I think in school teaching, and I entirely agree with etc. It is always up to teachers. It is always up to teachers to bring in these issues in their discourses. I mean, one great remarkable example, I don't want to, never wanted to discuss personal things, but in our own city, we have Dr. Anita Day's school, which, along with which, our Peace Center. Incidentally, we not only have a master's program in conflict management, very successful one recognized by UNESCO and UGC, but we have a full-fledged center for peace studies known as Malviya Center for Peace Research, which has PhD programs, so on and so forth, etc. So 20 years back, or even more, I don't remember, Anita would know, we started celebrating or commemorating Hiroshima Day, 6th August, 9th August. We started with a painting show. Now we brought in a lot of schools in that fold. And then later on in many of these schools, or at least in W.H. Smith, we see that that tradition is still on. So there are many occasions, like perhaps, we are soon going to have 2nd October, we will remember Mahatma Gandhi, like every time we do, and it should be the case. But that's also a day of non-violence. United Nations celebrates it as a day of non-violence. Amitabh, just a few days ago, we have International Day of Peace. Now, this was a great occasion wherein, so my point as a response to Suparna's question is, this peace studies can be inculcated both in a formal and informal manner. It brings peace. It makes you a better citizen. And in today's world, I'll tell you, even in best of Ivy universities, and I know with little personal experience I have in my family, that they don't look for your great performance in science and physics as much as they look for your extracurricular activities. Have you worked with some NGOs doing peace work, development work, and so on and so forth? So peace studies can be, introduced, if not so much in a formal manner, in informal manner, to become a global citizen. And I think that's what is the current hope of, international organizations and UN organizations to convince people. See, the tragedy is this market-oriented forces are gradually taking over the field of education. Even the United Nations has taken a backseat. They don't have that kind of money, that kind of resources. So that's where I think people have to do it. And this, I think, relates to this computer question. By the way, in computer, perhaps, and this is, well, very quickly, I'll finish this. In computer games also, there are very interesting peace games that have been introduced. We have this Mahatma Gandhi Institute of UNESCO Institute of Peace and Development in Delhi. It has introduced a series of peace games for computers. But once again, who will popularize it? If teachers go and just Google peace games on computer, they will introduce them. Parents can do it, but do they want it? So it requires a certain political will to go for it.
And so beautifully said. And Suparnaji, I'm sure that you got a perspective. And as Sir pointed out, there's a bit of a shift in the new education policy in that direction, talking about locally prepared, globally oriented citizen. We are talking about the sustainable development is also one of the elements which is being ingrained in the new education policy. And the framework is such, what Sir was talking about, there will be a lot of room for schools and teachers to have those formal, informal ways. And as you've given example of the school in Varanasi, W. Smith Memorial School, which is doing so many progressive work, various opportunities, events being celebrated to sensitize students about this phenomena of peace. And I would just like to also say that if you are a school teacher yourself, please add one more thing to it, is train the children to accept themselves as well as accept others the way they are. Because the moment we will learn that acceptance, the peace will start finding root within oneself. So this takes me to another question by Bhavna P. Singh. And that is, the question is, one question, do you think peace is an individual mindset first, then only it has vast meaning?
You know, I don't want to quote that man who has become very popular, unpopular rather, these days. And I'm not a Marxist. But my student days, I used to, I picked up something. You pick up something from liberals, from all kind of. So Karl Marx used to say something beautiful about it, very simplified. And one of the reasons why he became, or his ideology became less popular, unpopular. And he would say that, individual consciousness is the result of social being. So this consciousness, this mindset, as we call it ourselves, is also a product of our circumstances, our surroundings, and the way we live, the way we look at the world around. And so therefore, I think it's very important to understand that there is basically a no binary, no contradiction between the individual. The Indians, for example, the traditional Indian. I mean, it's very difficult to these days make a connection between traditional India and what is happening in modern India. But the traditional ideas are now being indigenous ideas are being talked about, and focus used to be on inner peace. In modern times, for example, Ravi Shankar and so many other people, they have actually practiced yoga and meditation in war-torn areas of Middle East. Even in Colombia peace process, actually Ravi Shankar was a very precious invitee when this peace accord was being signed. Why? Because he told the importance of yoga, meditation, and how it can bring about changes. I'm incidentally practicing yoga very late in my life, and let me see, and I find out, and I'll come back to you. But well, there is a relationship. You have to feel it, and you have to use it. Also, more importantly.
Absolutely. And sir, there is another question by Himangini Joshi, one of our audience and viewer. Hope, do we uh, instill peace amongst corporates and other professionals, especially amongst politicians, with a question mark? So, I mean, among corporates, politicians, and professionals, how we go about instilling peace, the concept of peace.
I mean, well, it's a reverse question. I thought the question is that how professionals and corporates and politicians should contribute to peace, but it's rightly and very aptly so. It's just the other way around. How do we make them peaceful?
Right.
See, I think it happens to all of us, and there are dozens and several dozens of fictions, novel, poetry, and philosophies, wherein the corporates, the very successful professionals, and even politicians one day realize the futility of it all. I mean, you don't have to be very modern. You can go back to our own traditions, different traditions.
Right.
I mean, why is it that Bill Gates suddenly realized that he has done enough and now he doesn't want to die with any money in his pocket? So this realization, it's a cultural thing also, I'll tell you. And this culture is, I'm using the term culture and not religion very deliberately. But why are you amassing so much of money? And why do these corporates have these actually? See, another funny thing has happened that most of the big corporate business schools in world over, Harvard and Yale and Warwick, etc., they are inviting Indian yogis and sometimes maybe who never know Amitabh if I have become jobless, people like you and me, to go and speak to them about inner peace and see, because this, I know one thing, a friend of mine, a very perpetual friend of mine, actually, these past many decades, he's very fond of, he's picked up a statement from Chomsky, I suppose, or no, some other very eminent thinker, I'm not getting his name right now. Even if you win the rat race, you still remain a rat. So, you know what I mean? So in this corporate world, who lives, who lasts, and who is remembered? I mean, politicians also, probably if you see, very successful politician of his time, but people's memories are very notoriously short. So how long will you last? So unless you do things swantaye sukhaye, as it known as, and the
Right.
corporates, because once again the same logic, they become victim of their own ambience. They have to step out. Himangi, that's fun. You step out and you see there is a world waiting outside. Some people are doing it differently, like people who are working the IIMs, people and so on and so forth. They are going out doing their social responsibilities and teaching young children or doing some social work and so on and so forth. Politicians, I don't know, because actually, unless my solution is that you change this expression of politicians for every time. You use some other expressions for them. Maybe that will bring about a change, because politics somehow is condemned to be about power, which is once again the same binary and power knowledge thing that we mentioned. Politics is not seen as a social transformation. I mean, it should be. I mean, why do you want police is, city state? Why do you want to hold this polity? Because you want to change people, but you don't want to change people. You do everything but to bring about that social transformation. Well, some people do it. No offenses. I mean, some people have made a mark by doing so, and that's the reason Mahatma Gandhi was. He did pure, pristine politics, but he never called himself a politician. And he, I remember one of the conversation, and this is sorry, I'm just this I must bring on board. So people asked Gandhi that why does he do politics? He says, because without that I can't do my religion. I can't do my social work. So I have to do politics. Politics is not my choice by the first go. So we have to, as younger generation, as people who have. And I'm sure Himangi and people like him, they have decades to be on this great planet Earth and reform. So we have to make some fundamental changes in our understanding.
Absolutely. And also when we talk about politicians, I think the people like us who are voting them needs to get educated, because we have the power to elect the right people in as well. And as somewhere I've read that wrong leaders are elected by good citizens who do not vote, or who vote the wrong choice maybe. But then I think we can also exercise that in a lighter note. So there is Anjali Malviya has a rejoinder question in terms of peace at the school level. She says that will not the world benefit more if peace was taught as a subject right from early school years?
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, you see, we have to see the experiences from all over the world, and I don't think I'm so well exposed, but little I know that in many schools, even in the United States, why even I don't know, but United States, they teach young children the skills of conflict resolution. I remember I had just begun my peace studies, and as a family we were in Washington DC, and it was during summertime that we admitted our boys to one of those summer schools. And in the evening, they returned and said, Papa, Pitaji, whatever, they keep on changing their expressions. But they said that we have learned this thing about conflict resolution. I said, what did you learn? He said, simple things. The teacher told us that you swap your position, you change your position, change your vantage point. If you're angry with somebody, go into his shoes and seize. And they were very excited about it. And I know at least that when I talk to them, that they have really learned the message of forgiveness. And by the way, forgiveness and peace, and I always keep on very emphatically emphasize this, it's not a utopia, euphoria. It's a pragmatic thing. If you learn to forgive, you don't have to read big saints and philosophers. It helps you. It helps you internally, blood pressure in your life, in your work, conflict resolution, swapping, enlarging. So these things can be and must be introduced to. See, the problem is that peace studies became value studies, and value, there was a big jostle. Values of which religion, which culture? Can we teach peace studies as a holistic thing which incorporates knowledge and insights from all religions, all cultures, which is what Gandhi's understanding was. Gandhi's Bunyadi Talim, he was very particular saying, and I remember, and here again, there's a eerie similarity between what all the thinkers say. Mahatma Gandhi and even Karl Marx, who is blamed to be very pedantic and very schematized, both said almost similar sentences. They told that the student, they said, what is your message for the student? They said, discover the simplest of truth yourself. Discover the simplest of truth yourself. As Amitabh, you said that you learned about religion, faith, etc. What was told to you. Why not question them? So if you bring that kind of interrogation into peace studies and just establish that peace we must study because, not because it is Om Shanti Om, but because it is pragmatic, it is useful in your life, in your corporate's life, for your market, for your society, and for dealing with such tragedies like COVID-19 that we are facing here.
Absolutely. And, that's so beautifully said. So we have a very intriguing question by Meenakshi Singh. Though more or less you've covered a lot of aspects related to that, but still, I think it's a very relevant statement and a query by her. The responsible statesmen of the world are disregarding the mechanism of establishing lasting peace. Your take on that, sir?
Well, see, the problem is, I'll give you some couple of practical examples.
Ji.
I have reasons to feel that I have very good understanding of President Obama. We'll not talk about whom, that's sometimes complicated.
Right.
You know, when Obama came, and by all reckoning, he was perhaps one of the most illustrious, most popular, most enlightened president that the United States had.
Right.
And in fact, if you remember that just a couple of months after his arrival, he was nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, which is incidentally accorded in Oslo, Norway. In fact, at that time, he was developing his trajectories about peace in Middle East. By the way, unpeacefulness in Middle East is one reason why the whole world remains unpeaceful. So even South Asia is part of Palestinian problems also. So when Obama was given that prize, he had not really achieved something, but the prizes are also given sometimes in hopes, and Obama deserved it because he evoked hope. Why I'm telling you? Obama finally came out and announced that Israel must learn to come on the negotiating table. He said that, well, this kind of warlike mentality would not solve the problem. Not only that the other countries should come on board, but Israel, he in fact chided Israel for being recalcitrant, for being aggressive, and so on and so forth. It was such a departure. It was such a transformation. We all celebrated it. But our celebration lasted just 48 hours. Because the third day, Obama retracted his statement. He said, no, this is not what I meant. A powerful person in his first term, enlightened, committed to peace, had to withdraw. Why? Because there was such a strong public pressure against this kind of talk he had. The lobby that supported Israel, I will not take any particular religious name to that. They opposed him, and so political leaders, Meenakshi, if you see, even दूर क्यों जाइए आप देखिए कि even in our country, I mean, one of the greatest statesmen, I believe, as far as peace is concerned, apart from, of course, Gandhi is there, Nehru had his own contribution, but our former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, he virtually didn't listen to anybody, and he goes to Lahore, and Lahore is very significant because there's a Lahore Resolution 1940. People say that the Pakistan ki bunyad Lahore Resolution pe rakhi gayi. He goes and visits that particular mosque there, and he does everything right. He invites the President Musharraf to Agra. He tried virtually everything possible to do it, and then somewhere, I mean, we were a part of that those days. We would move around freely. In Agra summit, I think the India and Pakistan were at the threshold of coming to a very clinching a negotiation, negotiated settlement. It didn't work out. There were factors and pressures and factors from that side. Musharraf said, what did he say? If we compromise on the present position in LOC in Kashmir, I'll have no option but to return to Delhi to stay in my old Haveli. I'm sure Indian leaders would have their own compulsions. And even the present Prime Minister Modi, I mean, it must be, and it must be emphasized that he took initiative. He invites, as soon as he assumes office, he invites all the South Asian leaders, including the Pakistani leaders. Then he makes a quick visit to Pakistan. So it's not that leaders don't want peace; they have compulsions. An episode: Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi, Western trained, beautiful people, the two people most charming, talking in suave English in Oxford, talking about peace. And they always talk about peace when they are not in power. But once you are in power, then, like your language changes. And I think the last point I will say, it's an interesting topic to me, because, it's very easy to evoke the image of enemy alien to get tremendous public support behind you. दुश्मन आ गया गांव की भाषा दुश्मन चढ़ गए so
Right.
like that is the reason why statesmen and that's at the end, that's why it said, Amitabh, peace is very tough. Walking that path, we are coming to, I think, closure. Walking
Right.
this path of peace requires a lot of patience, a lot of effort, a lot of frustration, but at the end it is worth it because there is no other way to do it.
There's no other way. There's no other way. And in fact, sir, you in between mentioned about this association with WS Memorial School and this for Peace Foundation, and you talked about this Hiroshima Nagasaki Day. Anita Day mentions that last year 500 schools took part with 4,500 entries in it. I think that's an amazing effort at a school level by any institution in this direction. So thank you so much, Anita ji, for mentioning that data for all of us. It's so educative listening to you, but then time is we've already shot by about 10 minutes from our planned time of an hour, and I could see that a lot of audience and viewers are all engrossed and still wanting to ask more questions, but maybe we will invite you again. And you mentioned that maybe you and I need to talk about take this process on inner peace. And I'm promising all our viewers and audience, I'm going to follow it up with Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya, and maybe we can do a series on inner peace with his help and bring more people and connect with more people. If all goes well, we will definitely make an effort in that direction in times to come very soon, if everything goes well. Sir, your last words in today's, because I do admit that for me, today's session with you in this interaction is a long walk for peace and a lot of insight into peace and conflict, the phenomena of peace, the challenges of towards ensuring peace, and what we can do in order to have peace, even at school level, as an educationist as well. So thank you for all the insights. But as you quite rightly said, peace is not easy. But then peace is not one of the option. This is the only option that we have, and so it is not a choice. It is a compulsion, because if we do not uh, take a walk towards peace, life is going to be always in a conflict. And with that, your final words to our viewers and audience in today's episode, sir.
Well, there is nothing final, Amitabh. But let me clinch a line from what we were discussing earlier. That life is or peace is a fascinating journey. So we should enjoy every minute, every moment of it. If we, peace not in sense of utopia, but what we can accommodate, what we can forgive, what we can learn. So in that sense, it's a long journey, it's a fascinating journey, and enjoy it as much as we should. Thank you once again, Amita, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir, for being with us today in this episode and being in Ed Talks with Amitabh. Thank you so much, sir. Friends, you are watching Ed Talks with Amitabh, and you were listening to Professor Priyankar Upadhyaya. And what profound words in the end, what he said, that peace, enjoy every moment of peace. It is not a utopia. We are living every moment, and it's a journey that we need to live and stay optimistic and positive towards the same. I hope that you found our interaction today with Professor Priyankar Upadhyay enriching, informative, and inspiring. And friends, peace is what the whole world needs at the moment. Peace is what our communities need at the moment. Peace is what our nation needs at this moment. Peace is what our family needs today. Let us carry on this walk for peace and enjoy every moment. And in this journey, we'll keep connecting to you and keep bringing eminent resource like we have one today, every Monday, 4 p.m. in Ed Talks with Amitabh. Till then, stay peaceful, stay safe, and be happy.